So guys, it already was a very long day. We learned a lot and heard a lot about many different topics, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Now, there is something like a cherry on the cake. So we have now a special occasion and a very special guest. In fact, we announced it as a keynote, but we've been having too much frontal talk by one person, and we've decided that another format would be more suitable. But first of all, let me introduce you our guest. I'm very happy she made her way to Hamburg, and I would like to welcome Francesca Bria and quickly introduce her. So it's quite long, so please bear with me. Francesca is one of the leading digital policy experts. She's an innovation economist. She works at the intersection of technology, geopolitics, I can't speak anymore, geopolitics, economics, and society. At the moment, she's the president of the Italian National Fund. No, the Innovation Fund, the National Innovation Fund. But also has been many positions. For example, she was the CDT and Innovation Officer of the City of Barcelona, also advising for innovation policy to the European Commission. She's also part of the New Institute, a think tank in Hamburg, where she's doing very interesting stuff we will learn about. And I'm very happy that she's with us today. So please welcome Francesca Bria. So Francesca actually proposed to have something like a fireside chat. So unfortunately, we don't have any fireside. Oh, we do. Okay, so we do have a fireside chat. And also, we would like to bring Jaromil on stage as well, because he's the fire. He's the fire on stage. I will try to keep up and maybe ask some questions, but I think it will happen quite naturally. So welcome, Francesca. Welcome, and thank you again, Jaromil. Happy to have you here with us. So first of all, Francesca, maybe something to warm up. I mean, how do you manage your time with everything you do?
Good question. I actually try to stay focused because I like to do things well. So I guess it's a mix of trying to focus when you do things, but also linking the different dimension of what I do. And in particular, after Barcelona, my CTO role, I've been working for 1 year with the United Nations globally on digital cities and digital rights. And then I moved back to Italy, where I'm from. And the last 3 years, 2 years in pandemic time, and then the final year, I've been pretty much based in Rome, which is my city, but at the same time continuing to work for the European Commission and keeping my city work rooted in Hamburg. So the last couple of years I've been quite a few times in this city, and I'm getting to know it much better.
So what are you doing specifically in Hamburg?
So we have a very interesting and ambitious project here, which is about prototyping next generation digital and data public policies, focusing on one particular aspect, which is really difficult to tackle. That is, with the approach, of course, of thinking that digitalization has to be linked with the big missions of our society, in particular the ecological transition and the climate crisis, and starting from people and not from technology. So this is always the approach I took also in Barcelona and previously in my previous work. So starting from people, real problems from their daily life, and make it a democratic process. But this time we are focusing on getting back the data which is extracted and produced by big companies in a city, urban data in particular, but then what is urban data is not always easy to define, and give it back to the people. So it's private to people, data sharing for the public interest. And I think it's an imperative to do it, because nowadays As you know, the digital economy looks super concentrated. I think we never had in the history of the Industrial Revolution such a concentration of market power and social power, and also political power, by the way, in the hands of very few companies. And this is pretty worrying, because when you see the possible developments of this, and now everyone is talking, of course, about artificial intelligence and ChatGPT, we are going to have, possibly, if this continues this way, 2 or 3 companies on the planet that are the only ones able to, train these language modeling processes, and then use them as a kind of, you are building operating systems here with a philosophy of decentralization, interoperability, open source, open standards, communities, and you want to decentralize and scale. But what's happening with those companies is 3 companies that are going to be able to manage the operating system for everything we do through maybe one single point, one interface. And those companies are also run by individuals that are pretty conservatives in their views about how the future should be like. And we think those decisions about how we shape our future should be back in the hands of the people, meaning with accountable democratic governments. And so I think a part of this bigger battle, let's say, to democratize this space, is the question of the information we all produce and how we get it back, in particular, because we all shape it, we all create it, we all produce it. But then how do we make sure that, for example, in cities, all the data that is produced can be used for the public interest? So to tackle CO2 emission and climate change, to make transportation more sustainable, for the circular economy, better public health care, better education. So those are big political topics, and I think at this point, not so many people are doing that. So this is a bit like the reason why we're doing this. And I think cities have a very interesting space in this conversation. And Hamburg in particular, because as you know, this is a city-state. So if Hamburg regulates on this ground, and we are looking at all possible ways, and I think this is maybe a conversation also interesting to have with Jaromil, because I think it's also about how do you scale the work you do through public policies. The city of Hamburg, if they legislate on this ground, for example, a data act, which allow people to take back the data which is produced privately on public ground, then this could enable a lot of the work you do and could enable, this kind of new ownership model of data, for example, data trust, to be built by communities like yours. And of course, this data needs to serve for a purpose, which is about, for example, decarbonizing the economy or creating new products which are more sustainable, or also rethinking about public services. And obviously, there is a question of value which is created that now it's concentrated in the hands of very few companies. So this data is very valuable, and this value needs to be given back to society.
So how do big companies react when you kind of, especially in Hamburg, approach them with your ideas?
Now, we're looking at lots of different possibilities. I think at the end, if we manage to experiment something ambitious, we already have the city of Barcelona, which is working with us, the city of Bologna, and other possible coalitions. It shouldn't be only cities, of course. We are working with a lot of experts, because this is a multidisciplinary effort. It requires lawyers, it requires economists and technologists, and also people that understand how society works, so it's very multidisciplinary. When I did it in Barcelona, I was only working on public procurement contracts, mainly, because this is a very good thing to do. Like, as you know, the public administration spend a lot of money in procuring services or products, and this is people money, it's taxation money. And so I did one thing in Barcelona, which was introducing data sovereignty clauses in procurement contracts. And I know when you talk about procurement, it seems this kind of, why do we care about procurement, and this is not sexy enough. But this is what governments do. They spend our money through procurement. And when I went to the lawyer of the city hall, and Barcelona is pretty innovative and pretty advanced, and I talked to him about who owns this data. We are paying for the service with our taxes, but then we are giving all the knowledge away, and this knowledge doesn't get back to the citizens that are paying for the service. And he didn't understand what I was talking about. And they didn't really know about what data is, the value of data, how do you create data sovereignty clauses in contracts. And also, we struggled very much to put clauses about open source software, open hardware, interoperability, privacy and security and ethics by design, and all the kind of things that I think for you it's like the norm. But when you try to do this in public procurement contracts, this can scale and can give the opportunity to work and collaborate with public administrations. Now we are trying something else. It's like, is there a way beyond procurement? For example, micromobility operators, when they get a license, can we ask to have the data? Can they share the data? Now, they can volunteer to share the data, and we are running an urban data challenge in Hamburg, so please look at the Nuance website. It's 40K to do an IT prototype. It's not too bad. But if you have an idea, please apply, because for us it's about collaborating with the City Hall on this data sharing mandate. But if they don't want to do it, what do we do? And then it's like, that's what we are looking into. And when they tell you it's about GDPR, so it's about privacy, this is not true, because we know how to protect privacy. And this is usually an excuse that big companies like Google, is there someone from Google here? They use to tell you, no, I can't really give my data because this is privacy, it's for privacy reasons. It's not, because we have solved the question of, preserving privacy through cryptography, but also through privacy enhancing technologies. So we can protect the privacy of people while sharing data. And the other argument they use is, no, this is a trade secret. So we have solved these both things, so we're not violating trade secrets, so we allow for small companies to compete. Actually, we do want to create a level playing field and not to get only the big corporations to get all the pie. So you are creating also economic development, so we protect trade secrets, we protect privacy, so this data can be shared and can be pulled in and can be given back to society. So that's what we're working on, so keep an eye. I'm pretty excited because I think this, if we change this in Europe, we can show that the data produced by all citizens, it's a public good, it's a public infrastructure, it belongs to all of us, and we can build on top of this data value. We can build, new products, new services, new applications, but on fair and democratic terms.
Thank you very much. I actually would like to turn your attention more on the European scale and European perspective. We've recently learned about new Bauhaus. I mean, Bauhaus, we know basically what it is, right? Now there's new Bauhaus. Jeremy, you as an artist, what does it mean to you? I mean, you're very familiar with Bauhaus and what it's supposed to be. What does new Bauhaus also in the context of the digital mean for you as an artist especially?
I think also responding, like Francesca called me in the cause pretty precisely on the technological implementation, the new Bauhaus is a good recipe for implementing what she's talking about. And in a better word, what I believe is a better word is the word in which the policies you're talking about are implemented, are actually mandated to companies. When we have all this open data, complexity will be overwhelming. And this is something we have to be careful about. Today, we had a scenario of crisis. That's how we started, the day. And crisis and complexity can be sort of freezing someone, like you don't know how to deal with complexity in crisis. And the Bauhaus concepts carry the solution, I think, in the values that the Bauhaus actually invented of functional minimalism. And I think from a technological perspective, keeping minimal and looking at how functions can be beautiful So keeping an aesthetic sense of minimalism is a great way to go across the enormous complexity on which these big companies thrive, because they create the complexity they will solve for us. So we are enslaved to deal with this complexity by their own patterns of interaction. And this may seem abstract, but I think that in the moment in which we look at data, for instance, in the moment in which we have an open data API, simplicity, minimalism will be very important. Will be very important to define the semantical framework we use. That's why in Interfacer, for instance, we worked with a vocabulary. So to share concepts of how we organize the data, because data quality will be a big issue. Data normalization will be a big problem to solve. When you have a lot of data, let's look at the financial sector that is like producing a lot of data, also open data. It's the sovereign of incompatibility. Central banks all across Europe release open data about the procurements of states, but navigating them is incredibly difficult. So if we start with a framework that establishes this sort of semantic level, the layer of a vocabulary, how data should be interpreted, how to give meaning, how to give really a Sinn, a Bedeutung to what we see as open data is important and will be absolutely crucial. The approach to develop these technologies, I think I find the Bauhaus and also this idea of the new Bauhaus very inspiring. To me, it means, again, minimalism. It means using technologies that existed 30 years ago. It means innovating with what exists also, and not always upgrade or substitute and add complexity. Especially for a company, means often to train the personnel to a new system. So factor that into the innovation path, and be like water.
So Francesca, there is now the Green Deal, right? It's basically a transition towards a green economy. Of course, sovereignty is also kind of a part of it. Then there is a new Bauhaus as a kind of framework. Can you put us in context? What would it, in the European perspective, actually, how is it interrelated?
Well, first of all, I have to say, pretty happy to be in Hamburg, where the Fridays for Future movement is so strong, because I think one idea, the reason why the new Bauhaus was put forward by the European Commission was because President von der Leyen, she realized that you have the Green Deal, which is this massive, legislation and framework to become carbon neutral as soon as possible and lower carbon emission, decarbonize the economy, the financial regulation to do that. But this, how you can do it only top down from, the European Commission. This will never happen. So you need to mobilize people on the ground, you need to create a movement, and this movement has to be cultural, so it has to be multidisciplinary. It cannot just be about, companies and the industry, and it cannot just be about science and technology, but it needs to involve the artists, the architects, the planners, citizens on the ground. So those kind of movements remind us, that at the end, that's the urgency, that's the big mission that we have. How do we get there? It requires this mobilization of everyone. And the new Bauhaus is also interesting because it has different parts. I think now Europe managed to mobilize around 100 millions, which is still pretty small in terms of European Commission money, but it's an interesting effort. And you have things like social housing. A lot it's creating more rights to housing, which are social, sustainable, and the building of new districts which are ecological and where there is a different way of living, which we have experienced during the pandemic, how it is important, the relations to nature, living in a more collective way, sustainable built environment, because the built environment is responsible for more than 70% of CO2 emissions. And so it's really important to change how the built environment works and logistics and all these kind of massive problems that we have with supply chains, of course, that we have experienced during COVID, but now, of course, with the chips war and a kind of new geopolitical situation, the energy crisis, inflation, going on the crisis mood again. But we are living in a poly crisis, and I think the reason why you have to rethink globalization and you have to rethink supply chains and the value chain, of course, and where is the value is produced, what materials. Do you have an extractive economy which is based on extracting critical raw materials in a new colonial way again, or do we change that? I mean, I learned from the FAB movement that this can be changed, from the makers movement that, you can also produce locally and you can be more sustainable, and you have to map also the journeys of products and critical raw materials and rare earth, which is a big thing, a big geopolitical topic. So having said that, I think that Europe is realizing that the challenge is really massive going forward. And on one side, we need a new form of industrial policy. For me, I mean, what I see here with the makers movement, you are doing a part of that. I mean, it is a new type of industrial policy, of a new industry, of course, which is not the heavy industry, it's something else. It connects to the territory, it connects to where value is created, and with an idea of circularity and sourcing of material and in and out and, all this kind of open source idea. But of course, it's confronted to the fact that Europe needs to put forward its own sovereignty in a sense, because we are in the middle of, the US on one side and China, and now people are talking about a Cold War II. I mean, a new Cold War. And one of the big issues in this new Cold War is the question about, the power over the need to change, I think, our economic model, our system, our capitalistic system, and our globalization. So I think Europe on one side is putting forward some ambitious policies, about digital sovereignty, the CHIPS Act, the Artificial Intelligence Act, investing in supercomputing, investing in quantum technology, but also do that with European values in a sense, and I think this is the big challenge we have. Can we show that you can develop, for example, artificial intelligence data and these technologies with democratic values, putting people first, respecting and preserving the fundamental value of citizens, liberal democracy, the rule of law, and all these things, and we don't have much examples. So only Europe can do it, aligning that vision with, with the European value. But then I think it's not enough to be a super regulator of the digital age, because then we end up regulating the big companies out there, and we saw how difficult it is. I mean, even if we have the Digital Service Act, the Digital Market Act, I don't want to go into a policy speech, but then it's always like us trying to regulate the big tech from the US or the big Chinese giants. So I think what we need to do in the future is make technologies here in Europe, which are built with those principles and values, and maybe scale those models, like the one you're experimenting here, which are more distributed, which are about collaboration, and they have to scale. And I think, of course, we want to change the industry, so if you have industry collaboration here that they're working, I will be happy to look into that. But for example, cities are a big hub where we can have those communities growing like we are doing at the moment, and through clever public policies, reclaiming this public space, which is about, rebuilding our cities, rethinking about public space. It should be greener, it should be more open for citizens, and so on. And I think this is a very winning, possibly, vision for Europe, and is also the new European Bauhaus vision. It's a new innovation model. And it's a new innovation model which has these rights at the very core, and this different approach to scaling up, communities and having really this. And I think that's where Europe has to show that it can do it. And if we don't do it in the next few years, I'm afraid it will be too late. because of the climate emergencies, because of the multiple crises we are facing, but also because, the battle that we have in front and the massive concentration of power, it should be something that we are aware of. And so, or we, scale it now, or I think it's going to be very, very, very hard to do this in the future.
Thank you very much. I have tons of questions, but I would actually open it up to the audience. Do you have any questions in mind? Niels was first.
Yeah, I want to get back to one point that you mentioned, the minimalism. Because after quite some years experience in the Fab Lab, I came to the point that I thought one principle, even in the Fab City, should be make it as analog as possible and as digital as necessary. Because we have so many products today that get some fancy display. I mean, my favorite example is an espresso machine. Italy has invented brilliant stuff without digital technology, and they run on the same system since the 1950s, 60s. So why? Keep it like that. So I'd be interested in how we could put this minimalism thought into practice.
Switched it off, yeah. Let's keep the coffee machine example. Actually, I'm not as Italian as you believe, because I like the filter coffee more.
No, this is, no. It's such a big deal.
I'm doing my outing now, yeah. And I mean, when in Italy you have no escape, but the filter coffee...
He lost the Italian passport now. Not that you're so concerned.
Seeking asylum. The filter coffee has a piece of plastic or something to hold a piece of paper, okay? The paper is a waste. But if you look at the coffee machine, the mocha, you have it's annoying, but you have that gummy part that can really melt. And also and as a programmer, I often forget the coffee machine on the fire. So it's a sort of trade-off, and analyzing these details. So I think that minimalism is not about caring less, but it's about caring more. Because to reduce the surface of vulnerability, the surface of attack, the surface of failure, requires more attention than just doing a prototype and, npm install Word and all the dependencies from Node.js. It takes a lot more to actually be minimal. Also with words, if I want to be shorter with my interventions, I have to probably drink less beers. But it's, I believe it is about focusing on the details, minimalism. And I agree with you, digital, but I believe that the digital, I mean, of course, I know software. I'm really bad with circuitry and electronics. In software, you can do a lot of things in a minimal way, but the industry, the huge industry, the ICT, which I believe is quite a bubble, has thrived on complexity. So right now, most things that you do digital are very complex. But I like to think, when I think digital, I like to think of the Z80, of a STM chip, of programming in C something that has input, output, spins, and does something. So, going on a display gets more complex, but it doesn't need to. I think what is very interesting right now, for instance, is RISC-V. So it's a new platform. Europe is already investing quite some research into it that can be built very easily. The factories to produce RISC-V chips can be built very easily. Europe will likely have some factories like that very soon. And I think this technology, as simple as it is, simpler than an Intel or ARM chip, actually an old architecture, RISC-V, has the potential to be the next Airbus of Europe. Because we could build factories in Europe building parts for the circuitry that we do. But for doing that, we will need a lot of minimalism and a lot of attention to details, because the feature creep, the dependency creep is behind the corner.
Can I make a comment about minimalism? Because since I was talking a lot about data sharing, I don't want to seem like this kind of data extractivist person. I think there is definitely a point that, for example, if you think about these AI systems at the moment, they are consuming around 30 to 300 times more energy than the previous ones. And in times where our governments are telling us, put on a coat, because you have to consume less energy because of the energy spike, the price of energy and the energy crisis, is very, very strange that all of us is chatting with a bot, consuming, this massive amount of energy. So I think minimalism should be also there, linking much more the energy we consume with what we do and the products we use and how we use data and for what. And I think we're going to have to be much more aware about what those systems do and what they're used for, and how to link it back to the needs of society. I think that's pretty minimalistic.
Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you very much. My name's Andrew. I'm from the Internet of Production Alliance, and I'm British, so I drink tea. I've never had a cup of coffee in my life. I really liked your comments about procurement, and I think if public procurement could figure out how to procure open hardware, whether that's open hardware medical devices, open hardware scientific instruments, or any kind of open hardware, assistive technologies, it could be transformative for people like us in the room. My question to you is about an innovation fund, as you're managing an innovation fund. It's very hard to get money for systems change. It's very easy to get money for innovative products. It's quite hard to get money for systems change. And it's also quite hard to get money for open initiatives, because a lot of innovation funds don't understand the business model, if you can call it that, describe it as a business model, an operating model for open projects. How do you tackle that in your fund?
Yeah, this is a great question. I would like to answer it not only what we do in the fund, but also a bit of a more mixed approach, because I think on one side, what I was talking about, also transforming public procurement, there is a need of building new digital public infrastructures. The public infrastructures of society, they cannot be in corporate hands only. I think we are having a massive, shift of wealth from the public to private hands, with no alternatives that are solid, that can scale and can support the essential services of society. And we are Europeans. We have the welfare state. We have a social market economy. So this is dangerous. And I think, the maturity of movement like these ones, of course, with an alliance of smart policymakers, maybe that's where we have to work a little bit more, is, for example, to take some of those standards and products and efforts and try to really scale them at the level of building those digital public infrastructures, from the hardware to the software to the data and so on. It's complex, we know. But we run public trains, we run public hospitals and so on. So I think it can be done, and this is one side and one possible answer to you. Then the other part is, of course, the Innovation Fund. We invest in startups, and we know the venture capitalist model, that's harder to change. I do see some space for what you say. On one side, because impact and all of that now, it's an imperative also for those funds. You have to look at environmental and social impact, and you have to measure those, take those into account in the way you measure also financial, investment. And I think there is a big opportunity to come in also with those technologies and things that you're talking about. And also because in Europe, venture capital is also more interesting because we are putting a lot of public money into funding deep tech startups, in biotech, in space technologies, in AI, and so on. And the French are doing it, the Italians, the Germans, and so on. And now the European Innovation Council will spend, in the next few years, 30 billion euros investing in deep tech startups. And I mean, there should be a space for these approaches also there. And of course, I mean, this will require also some alignment, because of course that's not how venture capital works today. But I think there is space for those kind of thinking.
Thank you. Another question from the audience? There is one. Robert?
Yeah, hello, Robert Mies, TU Berlin. So we've been doing a European project, working together with companies for 3.5 years until November, and they've been creating open source hardware, and essentially they were working with us in a space that was created for that, but it is very unusual to have that in a European project because of IPR, let's say, management expectations, and also the services of the European Union in that direction that are paid have a certain mandate. Yeah, so digital innovation hubs, they are now also created on a local level. You know that whole infrastructure. So, I mean, I know you are giving policy advice, so I mean, it's not your job to make this maybe answer, but just simply if you have any idea how this can be changed, because from a university point of view, the national funding is also very much looking at Europe today. So if you have any thoughts on that, I'd be very thankful.
I mean, you're specifically talking about the IP question in European project. We have a lot of experience on that. The problem there is not so much the regulation, because actually Europe has a lot of open science regulation, and you have the possibilities of have, as you know, IP agreements in your consortium when you get public money that can be pretty much open about intellectual property and technology transfer. But I think for this community, this question is absolutely critical, because to me, I mean, you're doing technology transfer here. I mean, you are doing a lot of technology transfer. And of course, so what do we do then with the intellectual property? But the problem there is when you work with companies, of course, with big corporates in particular. I mean, there is not a magic answer to that. I think definitely in research and development and in conditionalities applied to public funding, I think this is a very important mission to change that. For example, in European Digital Innovation Hubs, yes, for sure. And we have been talking a lot those days also with the city, here with the government, but also with KfW, your public investment bank in Germany. I mean, they really, you should have those conversations with them about conditionalities attached to public funding, which is different thing from public procurement, but so important. For example, we're giving massive funding to the car industry. Well, make sure they become sustainable, make sure they go electric, make sure they give back the data, make sure they do a lot of things. So putting requirements about receiving public funding, as in terms of fostering, for example, open source communities, this can be something that should be explored. So that would be my advice. I mean, not always easy, those conversations, but why do you create a movement like this one? Also to put pressure from your practice. So if this works, if it's a good model of tech transfer, then it has to be sustainable. And how do you sustain if you do not reinvest in the communities, in the infrastructures, and in these practices through a different open licensing, for example, scheme?
One last question. Raphael?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Raphael. I work at the Fab City Hamburg Association. Maybe this is a more personal question, but I think you're talking to already believers here. I mean, we share all the thoughts. And so I get this. And I also got what you did in Barcelona, like a lot of meetings and procurements and spending a lot of money. But I think the question I have is, I mean, you're in a position of influence, I would say. And I think that's what we are looking for, to have more influence in all these things. And I didn't know I didn't understand exactly like what you're doing in Hamburg or how you do it. I mean, maybe you can give some advice, maybe from your personal, like, daily work or so. Like, how can we get more influence in what we do? I mean, you obviously achieved some of this and advising people and spending a lot of money. And
this sounds really bad. I mean, I'm
No,
going
it's not
around
meant
making
bad.
meetings and spending lots of money.
no, I mean,
Bad.
you're in a position in influencing those things, and yeah. So practically, how can we be more involved in this, or how can we support? And I mean, the goals. I think we're all on the same page here to where we want to go, and yeah. But yeah.
Working with Francesca since several years, 2 decades by now, I can tell she has a lot of patience and diplomacy in the way she puts forward these claims that are very precise. Of course, it is a work with words that have power. So there is a particular discipline in philosophy of law that studies the power of words and making policies made of words and of exchange with people. Often myself, I found out that what her role is quite unique, and it doesn't need to have a whole group of people in a room, and it takes a lot of time to get to make sense to a different audience, not this one, to enter a vocabulary and to bring this sense into that room. And well, obviously I trust in her work.
No, but you do. I mean, my answer is I think you do have influence here as a community. I mean, this project is, you have a big partnership. You are influencing the way ministries here are thinking about it. So my question would be, at what level you want to have more influence? That's the question. Like, what are the obstacles? Because then it would help you to think through, okay, like, this is really a barrier for our community. So we need to focus here, and we need to do, I mean, I know this word, maybe you don't like it, but lobby in a positive sense from the bottom up to solve this problem. I would go very pragmatic about it, because I think your practice has been growing throughout the years. Now everybody's talking about circular and decarbonization and sustainability and new ways of doing things, and you have big programs at EU level. And so that you have to take your space, which is about, you know, and that's why we're talking about technology transfer, creating new skills, but also scaling up through standards, through public procurement, through new type of infrastructures, what you're doing. I think this is the way to gain influence. In fact, by practice, not by meetings. I'm sorry, actually, I'm struggling, if I can say a bit here, when I struggle, but still super interested, is that, you know, here policy, it's about, oh, let's do a law. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't solve everything by doing a law. You know, you then need to know, once the law is there, how do we implement it? How do we do it? How do we get it done? And I think what you're doing is showing how you can get it done. If you link the two things, this is powerful. So, I mean, that would be my advice.
The way you interpret the words of the law also have a lot of ramifications. So you need to be careful with that, Ex Eugene. I think that I learned into the world of also like public procurements and European research, what are my limits? So I can tell you for myself that I would never step into such a room with policy makers and make an argument that is understood by them, as much as you think I can be a good communicator on this audio, on this stage. And to have influence, the point I want to make, we need a good practice of interdisciplinarity that is inclusive. Nowadays, in a technical environment, we barely see the value of a philosopher, of a poet, of a literate. We need to start seeing that value, and we need to start collaborating, not by just taking an artist as a dissemination gig. Or, you know, there are many roles that can be learned from. So I'm turning this question into really like understanding what is interdisciplinarity, and I think that we had a lot of influence so far on the European Commission policies in the last years, shaking pretty much the ground because we applied this level of interdisciplinarity, because we worked not only on technical projects, but on citizen platform for social innovation, for understanding, for making people understand what is an infrastructure, what is technology, involving artists, involving different disciplines. So I think here we are on a good path, but that's something to look at. To be more influential, we need to be more inclusive.
Thank you. I actually want to wrap up this session by asking you each one question. If you could change one thing overnight, and Francesca, it's not about Jaromil drinking proper coffee, what would it be?
Well, of course, don't we have the main emergency, climate? So yeah, that would be like focusing on that, obviously, the answer. Not sure, like one single thing. As Jeremy was talking about complexity, I'm always a bit suspicious about when it's too simple, because it's like actually be trained to be connecting the different things and understanding levels of the problem. It cannot be so simple. So I think the challenges we have to tackle, they're not simple. That's why I like this question of multidisciplinarity and, understanding at different level how we can be influential in the neighborhood, community, national, European, broader. So I would tell you that our emergency is the environmental emergency, which is also a change of model, of development model. Big. So you cannot change it overnight, but definitely that's where we should be changing things.
Jaromil.
In our context, doing research also for the public good, I would like to see definitely less marketing and more passionate people about what they do. And I don't care about success or failure. I think there are a lot of KPIs that can be thrown out of the window. Passion as a positive externality here should be on the table. If you're passionate about something and you fail at it, it's no problem. But if you're not passionate about what you do, then you better get out of the way.
Thank you very much. So I would like to say thank you, Francesca, for being here, just for this event. Thank you, Jaromil, for being part of Aspiring, and I think I really enjoyed it. It was very entertaining. Small thank you present, Francesca.
Thank you. Too sweet.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And also Jaromil.
I get the wine.
Yes. You can change if you want.
You get the flowers, I get the wine. Thank you.